some chunky issues.
This meeting is being recorded.
I got y'all. All right, y'all. Thank you all for your patience as we get started. It is my biggest pleasure to be welcoming you all to our PropDontShop virtual introduction to native plant propagation. My name is Nathan Hunter. I'm with the Bronx River Alliance. I'm also employed by New York City Parks. And I'm really excited to be joined with some amazing guests this evening, Diana Gruberg and Dan Moon, who will be sharing with us kind of the tips and the techniques of plant propagation, specifically focusing on native plants. But before we kind of get into that, I just want to kind of acknowledge the land we're on and the space we're in. As we talk about native plants, I want to acknowledge the land that we are standing on, at least where I'm at currently. I'm located in the Bronx, where I'm streaming this, which is Lenni Lenape land. And I want to encourage you to also search up the land that you're on to as well. And so you can go to native-land.ca to seek out what land you're living on. And just acknowledging the land is not enough. So we encourage you to also consider where you can donate. Stuyvesant Cove Park at Candace, a manager down there, encourages folks to donate to the Manhattan Fund, which funds local Indigenous projects. It's through an NGO here in the city that helps those funds get to Indigenous folks living here in the city. For those that are joining us and have other resources that you'd like to shout out, I encourage you to just drop them right in the chat for community members to learn about how they can learn more about the land and the original tenants of our land, the original stewards, and also resources for folks to donate and support those Indigenous communities. But we are gathered here today to be with some great folks, our friends Dan Moon and Diana Gruberg. I'm going to hand it over to Dan Moon just to introduce himself and share a little bit about the work that he's been doing.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Dan Moon. I am a farmer and former horticulturalist for the Parks Department. I've always had a love for plants since I was a kid. I was always playing in the garden, and my mom kind of got me into gardening and horticulture, seed saving. So when I got to college, I decided to study agricultural science, specifically in organic farming and agroecology. And for 8 years, I worked in organic farming in the Hudson Valley and in Texas. And in 2014, I started working with the New York City Parks Department in Brooklyn as a gardener. I worked in Coney Island on the boardwalk gardens and around the borough. And I also started working on the foodway, the Bronx River foodway in 2017 in its first year for the first season. Then I started working at the Arthur Ross Nursery in 2018, where which is also known as the Citywide Nursery. The Citywide Nursery is a Parks Department nursery that provides plants for parks and community projects in all 5 boroughs. They're a really great resource for plants, and now they're actually growing all native plants, which is really exciting. Last year, I left the Parks Department and moved upstate to do electrical work, and now I'm actually running my own farm in Wappingers Falls, New York. It's called Sunnyvale Farm over here in Wappingers. We're about an hour north of New York City, and I'm focusing on organic produce, flowers, and herbs, and some currently some chickens. I have in the other room over here, some baby chicks. So thank you, Nathan. It's a pleasure to be here and to talk about something that I really love, propagating plants and natives and shrubs.
Thank you so much, Jamu, for being here. I mean, the connection between the foodway is something that I just really appreciate as one of the original gardeners at that space. And yeah, just great to be in good company with you again tonight. Diana, I'd love for you to just introduce yourself and tell folks what you're up to.
Thank you, Nathan. It's such a joy to be here with all of you. So I'm Diana Gruberg. I work at Gowanus Canal Conservancy. I've lived in New York on and off for the past 15 years, which I was just doing the math in my head. I can't believe it's been that long. But I originally am from Philadelphia, so kind of a similar, if different, and slightly smaller city. But both, I think, are really special places with kind of amazing wild parts to them that are my favorite and have really influenced me in both like my personal life and in my work. So in terms of my work, my background is in gardening, education, and landscape architecture. I worked as a gardener for the Parks Department as well as at Stuyvesant Cove Park, and those were both really formative experiences for me. Just being, getting to be up close and personal with these amazing spaces we have in our city that I didn't know about when I first moved here. And for the past 5.5 years, I've been working at Gowanus Canal Conservancy and been really growing out our plant nursery, which is called the Lowlands Nursery. So I'll just tell you quickly a little bit about it, and we're going to talk more about that later. But so we're a mission-driven community nursery focused on native plant species. And it started off as a small educational space for our urban ecology curriculum and volunteers to come grow plants, and also for planting projects around the Gowanus Canal and in the neighborhood. But we found that there was a great desire for these plants, and people were having a hard time finding them in the city and, in a publicly available kind of retail space. So each year for the past 5 years, we've doubled our distribution, and now we're distributing about 5,000 plants each year. And about a third of those are discounted or donated for neighborhood planting projects, and the rest are sold to the public, and that supports our programming. And we grow from seed. We're going to talk more about this, but from seed, from cuttings. We also supplement with plugs we order from other nurseries and pot up. And I just want to say, like, nurseries and propagation spaces are just the best spaces for learning and knowledge exchange. I think plant propagation is such a cool thing because it's accessible to people of all ages and abilities. That it's something that you can do sitting down in all different kinds of spaces, and seeing a plant grow from like a seed or a small piece of it to another plant never ceases to amaze me. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation, and yeah, can't wait to keep going. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that you're both are brimming with just excitement and also knowledge. So yeah, let's just keep going. And I appreciate where you left it, kind of acknowledging that propagation is like a great access point for learning as a community around these ideas of like, starting seeds is the go-to, but why not introduce cuttings, right? Or why not consider dividing plants as a method? Right. So tonight we're excited to go over those three things primarily, but we welcome your questions and conversations around these topics of propagation. For me, I wanted to bring this conversation to the forefront and really start a series of workshops this season around propagating. Candace, who is right now playing my right hand, super grateful, and myself will be hosting some propagation workshops throughout the season, actually. One at least this Saturday, March 12th, so you can actually visit us down at Stuyvesant Cove Park on 18th and Avenue C along the East River. We'll be meeting up right near the ferry location where you can pick up the ferry. And we'll be coming together to actually go in and harvest some cuttings of elderberries, among other plants, before they get raised, before they get destroyed, for the creation of this seawall that's protecting the Lower East Side. And so we're excited for that, and you can learn more by going to the bronxriver.org website /calendar, where you can find out all the events we're up to, but including these in-person propagation workshops. So this, came from, I'm a plant nerd at home. I, during the pandemic, was focused on propagating houseplants, and it was really an individual on Instagram that got me really interested in propagation. It was a person by the name of Bushy, or Nas, and they run a page called PropDontShop, and it was really exciting for me to learn about what propagation was or is. But Bushy really made the information accessible through for millennials and Gen Zers who are on social. And I encourage you to also seek out their page and to learn about PropDontShop. So you can follow them at PropDontShop or at Bush Lady. They're really dope, and they're, like I said, all about making plants accessible. And specifically, they challenge the concept of rare aroids, things like philodendrons. And so they make expensive kind of luxury plants really accessible and in reach. And they've also set up a trading system so you can actually trade propagations or cuttings that you've rooted. So I want to just uplift the work that they're doing on the West Coast and how they inspired this conversation tonight. So, you know, I've kind of named seed propagation, but I want to just like loosely kind of just talk about like what is plant propagation. And so for me, it's a process of creating new plants, right? Like cloning things quite literally. Diana and Dan, I'm really curious how you talk about plant propagation with your communities. Diana, do you want to talk about how you do it at Lowland?
Sure. So often I often talk about it like in terms of a nursery. Like when I say the word nursery, people often think of like a baby nursery. And so I think, you know, I think of them as baby plants, and kind of we always talk about them as our babies, and we're just kind of making more babies. And there's a lot of different ways to do that, and plants have a lot more ways to do it than humans do. So yeah, Dan, I don't know if you have a better way to talk about it.
It's true. There's a lot more ways to do it than humans. But yeah, it's which is why it's really cool. Propagation, like you said, is the process of making many from one or many from a few, and like you said, there's several different ways of doing it. The most familiar way I think that most people are is with seed propagation, which is starting seeds that come from a mother plant. You know, a seed is a new individual. It has unique genetic material, so it's different from its parent plant. You know, just like we're different from our parents, we're not exact clones of either of our parents. But seeds is the most common way that we're familiar with propagating. It has its advantages and disadvantages, but I think it's probably the simplest way. We'll get into that too, because there's cuttings are actually pretty easy, but people are usually don't know so much about it. Cuttings or vegetative propagation, as it's known, is actually cloning of plants. So you have a parent plant and you take a part of it, which contains all the same genetic material as that parent, and then you create baby plants from it. You can produce a multitude of them from cuttings, and it can be much faster than seed propagation, because you actually have a living, you know, stem, or in the case of division or root cuttings, a root that is already actively growing. It doesn't have to wake up like a seed has to wake up. And if you have a plant that you particularly like, you can make many of them from that one plant. Whereas if you took the seeds of a plant that you like, the seeds may not contain the same traits as the parent plant. So the three main ways that we're going to go over tonight is the seed propagation, root cuttings, and plant division, which are all very easy and simple and fun, and you can do them in your own home with you know, very inexpensive materials.
Exactly. And I appreciate that you named, like, seeds are diversity, right? They offer genetic diversity, which is not a clone, versus the others, which are totally about just copying the same plant, right? Something that I personally found really tricky and like confusing was just the fact that when you're working with native plants, it's not as easy as like the annuals, like vegetable plants, like a tomato, which can be grown just by placing the seed in soil with some humidity, and it will just kind of root. Diana, I wonder if you could break down what breaking dormancy looks like for us when it comes to native plants.
Sure, yeah. So there's this word stratification that gets thrown around a lot. And it's basically for a seed to germinate, it needs to go through some kind of process that tells it now is the time that it's safe to germinate. And since we live in a climate that goes through winter, often that period looks like winter, because if the seed dropped off the plant and germinated immediately, it would probably die in the cold months. So seeds have this ingenious kind of baked in coding that tells them when it's safe to germinate. So there's all different kinds of stratification. So often it's cold moist, and that's simulating winter. Sometimes it's fire. Sometimes, you know, the seed needs to be soaked. Seeds, so there's certain seeds that need light to germinate. So there's all these different stratification methods. And we have lots of ways of doing it, either kind of naturally, like outside, or you can simulate it by doing things like putting it in the fridge.
Right. And scarification is something else I was reading about and learning about, where you actually have to sometimes break it. I've heard about people using tools to break it. Is that something you would encourage, or do you really emphasize, you know, really mimicking nature for the best success?
Definitely. I mean, I think that certain species often, like, you can either scarify, so you can, like, if you take like a sumac seed, either you can scarify it by taking sandpaper and rubbing it, or you can put it in boiling hot water, and it'll kind of accomplish the same thing. So there's lots of methods, and or sometimes you just cut it with a knife. And we often will try different things and track it and see what worked best for different species. Dan, I don't know if you have additional things you want to add to that.
I've done both methods, the filing or you know, notching of the seed, and also the boiling method work really well for scarifying. And I usually find that like larger species like shrubs and trees require the scarification method, whereas smaller plants like herbs and herbaceous plants that don't get woody stems usually don't require as much scarification. They're more so on the stratification end. So if you're trying to grow, you know, certain herbaceous species, like a lot of wildflowers, they need more stratification, like the cold moist. Usually you'd have to, for stratification, you need to expose them to like at or below freezing temperatures for a period of either 30, 60, or 90 days. And there's a lot, I think there's some resources in the links that will, that goes through a bunch of different species and their stratification requirements. But usually the smaller the plant, I find, like generally the shorter the stratification period is too. And it's just amazing how intelligent plants are in their dormancy and protecting their seedlings from you know, from dying over the winter and having them germinate at the right time.
Do you find, like, either of you, that certain substrates or like growing mediums like support that process better than the other? Like, I guess Diana.
I would say we typically just use a very basic seed starting mix, which is like a mix of really fine perlite and peat moss. So we haven't experimented a ton with different media besides that for seed starting. The one thing we do use, because there are species that need light to germinate, and if you just sow flat on a surface and then leave it out all winter, you have, you know, you risk it blowing away, the seed blowing away. So recently, in recent years, we've started using quartz sand, which lets light through, and that allows the seed to kind of stay on the surface. And we've had much better germination rates since we started doing that.
Dan, do you have certain mediums that you gravitate towards, or media?
Generally at the nursery, we've mostly went with fine sifted pro mix, which is like what Diana was saying, a mixture of peat moss and perlite. That's really interesting. The quartz sand for the light requirement, light requiring seeds. We haven't tried that, but that sounds really cool. I'd love to try that. But generally, a regular garden soil mix that you can get in a hardware store or garden center would works for the vast majority of seeds. So fortunately it's an easy thing to do. We would just like sow the seeds in a moist flat, cover it, and then set it outside for the 30, 60, or 90-day period that's required to break the dormancy for stratification, and bring them in on a certain date and heat them up in the greenhouse, and wait for them to start popping out.
That must be so exciting, that moment.
Oh, it is. It's a little, you like got your fingers crossed and you're like, oh, I hope they didn't blow away, or I hope they're still viable, but it's like magic. It works.
That is awesome. I wonder, like we're talking about native plants, and a lot of us are working out of our home. We collectively came up with this little list, but would love to hear from both of you about like plants that are really easy to start at home. Some plants that we can encourage people to start by seed at home. Diana,
yeah, I think this list, sure, yeah, this is a list Dan and I just kind of quickly propagated. There's definitely others out there, but yeah, these are all seeds that you don't have to stratify or scarify. So, right now it's March. So if you wanted to do it over the winter, it's a little late. But these are species that you don't have to worry about that with, and you can just direct sow in the spring. So bee balms are really great. There's Monarda fistulosa and Monarda punctata. And the mountain mints are great. The anise hyssop, which is also a mint family plant. Little blue stem and asters both do well. I added Symphyotrichum oblongifolium, which is aromatic aster. That one we've had really good success with in our nursery in particular. We have not had very good success with smooth aster, on the other hand. So Dan, I'm actually curious if you have for that one.
No, I haven't had success germinating it in the greenhouse, but wherever I've had smooth aster gardens, I always find the big seedlings around in like the wood chips or the ground. They have seem to germinate really well outside next to their mother plant. So maybe they need that. But yeah, I haven't tried that too much smooth aster. But I did add the sunflower to this list too, because if you're just a beginning gardener, I think that I think the common sunflower may be native. I'm not sure. I know that there's others in the sunflower family that are natives, but if you're beginning home gardener and you want to try to germinate seeds, you can just take bird seed from sunflowers from a bird seed, put them in soil, soak them and grow them in a sunny space, and they're a great container plant. But they're sunflowers are a good beginner plant. But if you can get your hands on some of these other seeds, there are a lot of sources for them. And the nice thing about the bee balms, mountain mints, anise hyssop, especially, is they're aromatic. I know that I've used mountain mint and anise hyssop to make tea, which is awesome. And they're just great. These are all great pollinator plants, and really fun to grow. And they're perennial, so they will be around. I see someone dreams of a field of anise hyssop. They smell, smell amazing. These are all good plants to grow, and they're pretty tough. They're really tough too, as in they survive very well in their environments.
And I will just put a little plug. I have tons of anise hyssop saved from the foodway. If you're in need, please let me know, and I can definitely connect you with some anise hyssop from the foodway. And actually, I'll put a quick plug for March 20th. We'll be hosting a seed swap with the Bronx River Alliance at Starlight Park, and you can receive some there. seeds are just one part of it. And you mentioned, or you began mentioning, Dan, earlier about plant cuttings and just like how easy they really are. Do you want to kind of like kick it off, dive on in?
Absolutely. So yeah, the cuttings, like as we said before, is a way of cloning plants that you find, and I have some notes here jotted down about it because it's easy. It's very easy to do. There's kind of a lot to it though, especially when you look at woody plants and a lot of the native shrub species that we like. You first of all, for every different species of plant, it has you can probably make a cutting of almost every species, including pine trees, down to the species in the last slide. But the ease at which you can do it kind of varies. So the first thing I would say, as far as if you want to take cuttings, is to be able to ID plants. So it's good to brush up on plant identification. We have a list like the last one about easy to propagate plants, but when you go out and look for cuttings or ask for cuttings, it's good to be able to identify them. So that's something that's good for anyone who wants to work with plants, is to learn plant ID. It's fun and it's very rewarding. And all my friends can tell you, my girlfriend can tell you that whenever I go somewhere, I'm always IDing plants, and it's it's like a never-ending process. So the other thing is, so once you know what plants you want to take cuttings of and can identify them, you want to look at sources for your cuttings. So a great source are Parks Department gardeners, because in the Parks Department, they grow many of these native species. At the Foodway, there's a lot of great native species, but you don't want to just go to a space and start snipping things willy-nilly, because someone's inevitably going to be upset, especially if they planted and took care of that plant. So you want to make sure wherever you're taking your cuttings from, you're sourcing them properly and asking the appropriate people for the permission to get them. So that's a very big consideration, to be mindful of the space and people who maintain it. Also, the other thing about that is, if you find someone who's maintaining a space like a gardener or a homeowner, etc., it's really good to start a conversation with them about that plant, because they probably know a lot about the plant too. So especially as far as like where it likes to grow, its conditions. So that leads into the third thing I had, is know where you would intend to grow your cuttings. If you have a space in mind, you want to know that the conditions of that site are going to support your plant, and it's going to be happy there, as well as your capacity to raise the cuttings. Once they're growing plants, you want to make sure that you have a good space to grow them out until they're ready to transplant, which can be a very short amount of time after the plant's root, because cuttings, once they start to form roots, can be planted pretty quickly. So next thing I'm going to show you are just a few tools that are important, and I hope you can see my screen. I can't really see myself here too well, but first and foremost tool that's good is a pair of thank you, Nathan, pair of pruners like these. These are called bypass pruners. I think they're Felcos, but pruners are good. Are like the best thing that you can do to make cuttings. But if you don't have these, you don't want to go buy them, you can use scissors as long as the stems are small enough. So the pruners are basically all you need to start. The other thing you would need would be a container. So in this jar, it's just a regular mason jar. I have some red twig dogwoods. Also in the PowerPoint slide, there's the willows that Nathan grew are in a mason jar as well. So mason jar, old salsa jar, any kind of container. I like clear containers because you can see the roots forming, but it doesn't have to be clear. So with that's basically all you need, and some water, of course. You can also do it in soil, but that I'll talk about later. Water is the easiest one to substrate to do cuttings in because it is what the plant needs. And basically what you want to do is when you have a branch or a stem that you're doing cuttings, first of all, you want to know this, which goes back into species identification and knowledge of the species, what time of the year it likes to do cuttings or likes to produce roots. So for most shrubs, which I would say are easier to do than trees, they like to root in when they're dormant. So as you can see, there's no leaves on this. I took this from outside today, and dogwoods, willows, elderberries, the ones on the list are all good dormant plants to do cuttings from. When you have an herbaceous plant like the mints or anything that's not woody, you're not going to get any plant from them in the wintertime because all the living tissue is below the ground. So any stems that you take from a dormant mint plant or mountain mint or bee balm is going to be, probably is going to be dead most likely. So that brings me to the next thing is you want to make sure that the tissue that you're cutting is alive. So you can tell from a dogwood just from the outside, the color, that it's a living tissue. If it's dead, like this tip here, it'll be brown or gray. An elderberry stem is a little different because you can't actually from the outside tell whether it's alive or dead. So what I do is I'll carefully and lightly take my fingernail and just scrape it a little bit back, just a little bit of tissue. And you can see that it's green underneath. That is living tissue. And that'll be true any time of the year, winter, spring, summer, or fall. I'm trying to see if I have a dead piece to give you an example. This one doesn't look very good. Yeah, okay, so this one I'm scraping. Oh, no, it's good. It's kind of flimsy, but it'll be like a tan or beige color underneath if it's not living, and you don't want to take cuttings from a non-living plant because unless you have some kind of special powers, it's not going to come back. So you make sure that you have a living branch, and then the general rule is to cut to propagate 4 nodes. So a node is where the buds form. So on this dogwood, you have a node here, a stem, and then another node here, and then a stem, node, and node. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4 nodes. These are also technically more nodes, but that should be good. This is a good amount of stem tissue to propagate from. The roots, when you put them in the water, will form usually around the nodes because the nodes are where the dormant buds are. So that's undifferentiated like stem cell tissue in these nodes that when you cut the plant and you wake it up from dormancy, it starts to pull water, and hormones that would be coming from the root are not flowing there. So it starts to produce rooting hormones that will turn those bud cells into roots. So what you'll do is you'll cut just below the node for the end that you're sticking in the water, and you want to try to cover 2 nodes. But in the easy species, 1 node can be sufficient. Your stem doesn't have to be that big to do a cutting. So for this elderberry, this is a huge stem. It's like it's almost 2 feet or so, or almost 18 inches, I'd say. And my container can't accommodate it. So actually what I should do is trim this to this node. So I'm going to do that right now. And when you're using bypass pruners, really quick tutorial, you have 2 sides of the pruners. You have an anvil side. It's kind of hard to see, but from this angle, this is the anvil, this is the blade. The anvil holds the branch in place and the blade cuts it. So it's a hook and a blade. The hook, if you notice, one side the blade bypasses like that over the anvil. The other side, the anvil is on this side. When you make your cut, you want the anvil to be on the side that you're discarding, because what it does is it'll actually crush the tissue. So to make a nice clean cut that's not going to damage the living tissue, the anvil is on, let's see if I get this side, right? You can kind of see that. And so cut it, and it's pretty, nothing is crushed here. And you can't really tell on the piece that I cut off, but it can make a difference in damaging that tissue. So be aware of how you angle your pruners, or orient them rather. Same thing when you're pruning any kind of plant or shrub. You always want the living side of the plant to have the blade on it and the anvil on the side that you're discarding. So I have my cut. It's one node that's going to be underwater because I don't have a large enough jar. I'm going to stick it in with the other stems, and I have some cuttings. I put the date and label it the species, and I'll set it in a warm space with moderate light. You don't want too much direct light for cuttings, because when they start to wake up, if the leaves grow too rapidly, it'll use a lot of water, but that's not as much of an issue in the winter with dormant species. So sorry if that was kind of a lot of information in a short amount of time, but the last thing I'll say is, like, you leave it in a light space that's lit, and in a few weeks, as the plant wakes up in the warm lit space, it'll start to form roots, and then you can, once the roots form, you can put them into soil, and the plant will grow, and then you can transplant it into a bigger pot or into its desired space. So that's in a nutshell cuttings. There's also probably a lot of good videos on it too, out there if you want some to refresh or to learn more about it.
That was perfect, Dan. That was really a really wonderful, comprehensive kind of overview. And Diana, I wonder, like, running a nursery, I mean, that you're doing the process that Daniel just mentioned. I'm curious, like, how that plays out. And if you use rooting hormone, I wonder if you want to comment on rooting hormone.
Sure, yeah. So we do all our cuttings outside. So we just directly put them into soil. We don't do it in water, which probably gives us a lower rate of success, but is just, easier for us to do that. And yeah, there's certain species that we do use rooting hormone for, and others that we don't need to. So like all the willows that we don't need to use rooting hormone. Honeysuckle vine does fine on its own, but then there's others that we'll use rooting hormone for. And we're always like trying new species to see if we can succeed with rooting hormone. So like some that we've been surprised at, like junipers, we're surprised that we had success with rooting hormone. Yeah.
That's exciting. Yeah, I wonder, I imagine, rooting hormone's really great for the harder stuff like hardwoods, or some of the tougher softwoods. Like I think about the elderberries we're going to harvest this Saturday. Candace was acknowledging that they're leafing out. So like they're already, they're getting older. So the leading edge is like the softwood, the really softer part of the branch. That's like the easy part. I mean, elders, I guess in general, are probably not the best example to talk about this because they're so easy to root. But I imagine at the woodier part of plants, that's where you'd want to really use rooting hormone versus the softer leading edge, the new growth. Does that sound right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, definitely have less success with the harder, further in parts of the plant.
Something we've been playing with willows as rooting hormone at our office, and we've just been there's a weeping willow near our office. We've been chopping up the branches, soaking the water for about 24 to 48 hours, and then using that water to inoculate the soil that we're maybe tucking in the cuttings, or we've actually just straight up put sticks or like twigs in the water, and that's like rooted things remarkably fast, almost at the same exact rate as horticultural rooting hormone. Granted, I will just acknowledge that those species we used were already naturally like really fast growers. Like we did red twig dogwood, elderberries, and the willows. So I wanted to acknowledge that willows are a free and available resource all over our parks and can be used as a rooting hormone for those projects.
Nathan, can I add a fun fact that I learned is that aspirin, regular over-the-counter aspirin, is also a rooting hormone, which comes from willow. So if you can't find a willow tree, which is probably the more fun way to do it, but if you can't find it and you don't want to go buy rooting hormone, you can buy a bottle of aspirin and crush up the pills and dissolve it in water and use that as a rooting hormone too.
Yeah, I think that's great. I'm gonna just screen share to show a visual, as well as the easiest native plants to root. But yeah, any other like kind of last thoughts about the rooting cuttings or stem cuttings before we kind of move on to plant divisions?
I just wanted to second what Dan mentioned about sort of working with your local gardeners and kind of getting into the habit of having kind of, if you have your own garden or you work in a community garden space, like anytime you're pruning your shrubs, you can think of that as a great time to start rooting cuttings and thinking of it as like a process. And that's what we try to do in our nursery and working in our gardens. And we also, anytime, you know, when we're planting plants, we're thinking, oh, this will be a great source plant for cuttings down the line. So we'll often plant things for that purpose specifically also.
Yeah, I really appreciate you naming those steps. And yeah, the relationships that go behind these things, because yeah, gardeners don't work alone, they work in collaboration. So this is the list that y'all had created. And we're going to be seeing yucca in just a minute, but I wanted to just highlight the image in the bottom left of those nodes rooting. This is the red twig dogwood. Just to kind of show what Dan was showing on screen, that same exact plant. This is what it will look like probably what, in a week, 2 weeks?
Yeah, it depends. It depends on the temperature. If it's warm, like warmth really helps for rooting. If you can have a heated under space, or as long as the general whole cutting is heated, yeah, roots will form, and that's a beautiful sight. The other thing I would add, though, if you are doing it with the water method, like I outlined, it's good to change the water once every couple of days, because there's bacteria on the stems of the plants, and so bacteria, fungus will grow in the water. So just switch it out every couple of days, and you'll see something like that's in the screen there.
Let's talk about plant divisions. I know this is one of my favorite ways to receive free plants. How do you both engage with plant division? Diana?
Yeah, plant division is also one of my favorites because you just get 2 for the price of 1. And I think we have in the resources, I linked a video of us demoing it at our nursery. And often we'll do division for plants that are hard to grow from seed. So specifically things like sedges or anemone, which are plants we love to have, but we have struggled with growing them from seed. So we like to have kind of planted areas of it that we can dig out and then create divisions from. This is a picture of Yucca filamentosa, which is another favorite in Gowanus because it's a very salt tolerant plant that kind of seems to be able to handle the tree pits and pollution of Gowanus really well. So we kind of plant this everywhere, and then over time, it builds out all of these, it grows out all these pups, so small baby plants that kind of come from at the side of the parent plant. And when that happens, we dig them up and we can divide them. And for different plants, you can use either your hands to just physically separate the plants, or sometimes a knife or a dividing tool. And yucca is really cool because you can divide them, and while you're at it, you can also do root cuttings or rhizome cuttings. So in this picture, you can see this is a volunteer creating both divisions and root cuttings. And with yuccas, we'll do cuttings usually like 2 or 3 inch pieces, and then just put them right in the soil. We do this both in the fall and the spring, and they do fairly well. And one tip there, sometimes when you're cutting them up, you can kind of see in the picture there's little rootlets. You want the rootlets to point down the way they would, like in the soil, the way they would like if they're naturally growing. But sometimes you lose track of which direction it's going. So I would just always place it on its side if you don't know what direction once you've cut up the root into these sections. Yeah, so yucca is definitely one of my favorites to work with. And definitely check out the demo video that we linked. I think I'll just say a kitchen knife is like my favorite tool for divisions, and just finding the center of the plant, if it's like a grass or a rush or a sedge, and literally chopping it in half. It's very satisfying. And I often find that the plant is instantly happier because of it. It really, you know, it stimulates the growth of the plant when you cut it. So it's, I often have to tell folks who are new to it, you know, it's okay to be rough, because the plant will thank you for it later.
I love that. Dan, what are some of your favorite plants to divide, or how do you use plant division?
I love the yucca. That looks like, actually the root looks kind of delicious. But that's a great plant. I have mostly experienced, though, at Citywide Nursery, we divided a lot of asters, asters and sedges, and a few grasses. Irises are also good. Just looking at your list here, and basically the way Diana outlined is the process. You know, you could go as small as you could find as small as a plant as you can within the group of plants, because every species that you can divide easily grows kind of differently. But the cool thing about it is you have an individual plant. It's not like cuttings where you have to let the roots develop via hormonal action. It is actually in an entire little plant. So you just find where it connects to the mother plant and you cut the plant. In the case of asters, it's almost like little umbilical cords from the mother plant, and there's these little baby ones that are coming out underground. You can see there's roots and little leaf buds, and you cut it and you could put them into containers. So yeah, division is a really great way of dividing, of cloning plants, and fun and pretty foolhardy. I mean, it's easy, as long as if you can give that little pup, or I'm not sure what you call it, if you can give it a good soil medium and pot, it'll be really happy and grow quickly. Both plants, like the mother and the babies, will be happy that you did it.
Yeah, and I think just looking forward to the spring, if you're looking for divisions or plants to divide, like that you have a relationship with a gardener to divide, I would encourage you, the Foodway is a great spot. I'm looking at yarrow in this image, the bottom left plant, and that is one that I already know is on our list of divisions this spring. So yeah, definitely. Thank you both for sharing that. You know, I think those are the three buckets of areas that we wanted to kind of discuss around plant propagation. We are at 8 o'clock, and I want to just acknowledge that. And I wanted to share some upcoming events that are happening. But before doing that, let me share those events that are coming up. And then I would love to just hear from the audience to hear if there's specific questions, things that we didn't really touch upon tonight that you want to get answered before we split up. But first, I would just like to acknowledge again that we are in spring, which is an exciting time to be in. And at the Foodway, we are prepping for some upcoming programming. The propagation workshops are one. So in the middle there, you'll see this coming Saturday is the workshop I mentioned at the beginning with Candace from Sty Cove. We'll be meeting down there and taking some cuttings of elders. And then just some other events that are going to be taking place on Sunday, March 20th. We're pivoting from Concrete Plant Park, and we'll be at Starlight Park, just adjacent to Concrete Plant Park. But on April 2nd, we'll be at Concrete Plant Park doing another propagation workshop. And then the soil testing days, we have a lineup of some soil testing days coming up, March 20th being the first, April 2nd, and June 4th. And you can find out more about all these events through Bronx River Alliance's website or by visiting the link at the top of the page. I'm also just gonna stop screen sharing for real this time and just share out, we kept referencing a resource document that y'all were probably like, where is this resource document? Attached, just dropped in the chat, is a resource document with a lot of different links that both Diana and Dan have curated to support you in kind of moving forward with these 3 buckets of propagation. There's also a short database of a whole bunch of native plants and the best ways to propagate them based on easy, medium, and difficulty. So I encourage you to dive into that later. But while we're still together, I would love to just turn it over to the audience to like hear any questions that you might have. I know one that came up earlier and I did not ignore but stored away for now was from Andrew. A question around sunflower varieties, if there were any recommendations for containers.
I would say dwarf varieties, so not the type that you would find in your bird seed mix. Although they would do well. Sunflowers are really tough plants. They're amazing. But I would say like I just know off the top of my head, teddy bear sunflowers are shorter. They're not going to like grow giant and topple your container over. So the teddy bear varieties or anything else that's dwarf like that would be good for containers. Yeah.
Diana, did you have any thoughts about sunflowers?
No. I just had a Dan on that.
I have a question for you that Candace posed, and I agree with this question because I struggle too. How do you germinate passion flowers by seed? Do you have any tricks?
I don't know, but this is such a beautiful, wonderful plant. Like, yeah, Dan, do you have thoughts?
Yeah, I've actually grown them from seed from the supermarket, from the fruit. You just it can take a little while. It can take more than a few weeks, as I recall. I did it a few years ago, and a couple of times, and you just basically you don't want to overwater them, but you just you take them out of the fruit, you dry them out, and then plant them in potting soil, and as long as it's kept moist and warm, it's a tropical species, so keep them moist and warm and under some light and it might take up to a month, but you just have to be patient with the passion flower. But yeah, beautiful, and yeah, it's so nice when you finally get it to flower. It's a great house plant too, as long as you have a sunny window. So good luck with the passion flower.
We're gonna have to keep trying, Candace. There's a native variety that I think we're both really intrigued and having in our spaces. So I've had, the only way, Candace, that I've seen success is from division, from gifts from people.
Yeah, well, I just bought another pack. The other thing I was gonna say, I was wondering from a scarification standpoint, because somebody told me last year to spit in my corn when I soak my corn, to spit in it. And that like maybe the stomach acid would help because you're kind of then doing what birds do. So I was thinking I was going to do like a nicking versus boiling versus spitting process. None of them will probably germ, but I'll try it again. I'm not going to quit. But yeah, they're the like temperate ones that I have. So I want to try.
I love that. Definitely cool. Share your results.
Love a good science project. We have another question from Flo. Do y'all have any tips for properly scarifying schizandra? I want to grow it in the Caribbean. Do you know this plant? Are you familiar?
I'm not.
Tropicals, man. They're throwing us.
Stratify, is it a northern species or is it a Caribbean species?
I'm honestly not sure. I know it's a berry. It's really good for your digestive system. It grows on a vine, schizandra. And yeah. I know it's native to, I think, certain parts of Japan. So I'm not really sure, but I've heard that it grows better in like much warmer climates. So yeah.
my guess would be if it grows in warmer climates, it probably doesn't need to be stratified because that's kind of a northern adaptation. So I'm not sure. I've never heard of that, but that's really cool. And it's edible too. It's a berry.
Yeah, it's a berry. It's mostly used medicinally, but it's called the 5-flavor berry. So when you first eat it, it's kind of sour, then it's really sweet, and it has all the different like effects that Chinese medicine uses. So it's like sour, sweet, mild, all of those things. And it's really good for your immune system. It's an adaptogen. Yeah, it's great.
That's awesome. I'm gonna look that up now. I hope we can grow them here. That sounds really cool.
Right?
I think we can. I actually just went to a talk at Nofa, Vermont by a nursery in the Catskills. I'm trying to Google it right now, and they grow them. So you can, one can.
Have you ever tasted it?
Me no. Natalie?
Yeah, if you go to Flower Power in the city, they have it. Kalustians in the city has it. You could definitely order it online too. I think in Chinese medicine, it's Wu Wei Zhe. Don't quote me on that though. But yeah, 5-flavor berry.
Well, I know what I'm trying next. What new berry? That's awesome.
That is awesome. Yeah, wondering if anyone else has any other thoughts kind of about these methods of propagation, any questions? No, Andrew was asking about the willows at Starlight. They're weeping willows, so they're pretty easy to identify. And there's one in the kind of the center of the park where a lot of the construction's happening by the Cross Bronx, and then there's one by the southern end of the park, so you can find them there. Just looking through the chat to see if there's any questions we missed. But I think we got all of them.
Really quickly, Nathan, I just remembered
Please.
something about divisions, just to throw it in. A really cool thing about the division is you don't necessarily have to plant your baby plants in a pot like you do a cutting, or you could just put it right into on site wherever you want to plant it, as long as there's not like a lot of competing plants. But when you said yarrow, it triggered a memory of when I propagated a whole bunch of yarrow in my district, and I had like a source of them, and I just put them in all these gardens around, and I just took little stem cuttings or with the roots, and they just like came up like wildfire. So yeah, division is a really great way to propagate.
Thank you, Candace, for the resource sharing in the chat. There was a question from Jacqueline: how can I propagate my snake plant? A houseplant question. I know snake plants are awesome because they're very generous. Dan, have you had experience, or Diana? I know personally I have, but I'd love to hear.
I did it in college. All you got to do is you snip it and you stick it in the soil, and put it in light, I guess. The caveat with it though, if it's a variegated, if it's a yellow and green snake plant, the mother plant, which is kind of more interesting to look at. The funny thing about that is when you do that cutting, when you do a cutting of a snake plant that's variegated yellow and green, it will revert to just a green snake plant. The next generation won't have that same coloring to it. So that's the only thing, but pretty easy. They don't need a lot of water, so it's just the thing that takes a bit of time, but they're easy. They don't even need division or anything. You just cut the leaf. You said you did some, Nathan. Have you propagated them too?
I did the leaf. I broke off a piece of leaf, and then it fell on the ground, and like a day later I threw it in a cup of water because I saw online somewhere you could do that, and it just rooted, and then there was a little baby. Diana, do you have experience with the snake plant?
Not snake plants, and I'm actually terrible with house plants generally. Yeah, I'm better with the outdoor ones.
I find that's like a theme with people. Like it's like either outside or inside. Often the two are just pretty different.
They really are.
Ooh. My nursery folks, anyone have experience growing rue indoors? No. I've always, my rue, when I've grown it indoors, always gets really leggy. And I make the assumption it's because of light, the lack of light. So I imagine it needs some good light because it's a tropical plant. Does anyone else on this call have any experience growing rue indoors? I know it's got a lot of spiritual and medicinal value. Yeah, I think that's one to look up. I'll keep that in mind, Flo. Okay, well, I do want to just kind of be conscious of people's time tonight, and I really appreciate the support around tech from Candace and being in such great company with you, Diana and Dan. This has been a great conversation, and I remind people, like, this is just kind of an introduction. This is, you know, there's so much. When we were planning this, we were like, well, where do we even begin? Because there's just so much. So we want to remind people that, like, we're thinking maybe having more of these conversations throughout the year, especially when it comes to native plant seed starting. I know we talked about how that really is, fall is the time. Fall is the time to collect those seeds and then to consider how you're going to set it up for spring arrival. So I'm thinking a fall conversation around seed starting. And Diana's nodding her head.
Yeah, sounds great. And more seed exchanges, because we always have extras in Gowanus come fall. So be excited to do that.
Dan, you have any closing words you want to leave with people?
I would say just try to, you know, get out there, try it, try doing some cuttings, you know, learn some plant ID. And if you're interested in working with plants and doing stuff, you know, volunteer, you know, get involved with the community gardens and whoever is working with plants, and also definitely respect the spaces if you're going to take cuttings. That's like a warning, because gardeners are, you know, they can be very prickly too if you take their plants. So yeah, it's a really good, was a great conversation, especially with spring coming. So I'm very happy to be part of it, and I'm really excited for all the growing that's going to be happening this season.
And I would just plug coming to volunteer at our nursery in Gowanus. We have, if you go onto the Gowanus Canal Conservancy website, we have opportunities to volunteer throughout the year, so you can be involved with everything, from propagating cuttings to seed sowing in the fall and winter. We're still going to do some more seed sowing for some of those species that we listed on the slide that get sown in the spring, and then just potting up plants. So I would love to see you all out in Gowanus.
Yeah, so I'm going to just share with folks in a follow-up email the resources and a link to the recording from tonight to share with other folks. But again, just a big thank you to all of you for showing up tonight and being present and lending your energy to the space. And we'll see you at a propagation event or at a nursery sometime very soon. All right, thanks, folks. Have a great night.
Thank you for